then go/Chaplain Lee. And so he would appreciate any help, because understand, this could be us. Any one of us could be Pastor Lee. Our speaker tonight is Pastor Steve Lee. He was indicted along with President Trump and 17 others in Georgia. Now, mind you, he lives here. The issue of Pastor Lee, President Trump, and the other 17 that are being targeted is a way bigger issue than you might first think. This could be any of us. They could decide for one thing that we do that we could be indicted as well. Please keep that in mind. I know other people who are being persecuted, and I think it's important that we understand. I personally know another person that's being persecuted by our government. If you saw the movie Police State, he could be added to that movie. If you haven't seen the movie Police State, please watch it. It's really important, because you can see one of the people on there was the president of Moms for America. We had them here in the summer, the vice president, but the president is in the movie being persecuted as well. So please keep in mind that it's just everyday moms and dads, pastors, that they're going after because they don't like what we're doing. Our freedom of speech and religious freedom are being attacked here and throughout the United States. Please join me in welcoming Pastor Lee.
Thank you, Debbie. It's good to be with you here this evening. I consider this a privilege. I like the name of the group here, Three-Headed Eagle Alliance. And I checked that out. I was trying to figure out what is that, what is the meaning there. And it's about balance of powers, division of powers. It's about checks and balances in the government. And it's a recognition of the truth that we live in a fallen world. We need checks and balances. We're in trouble if we ever cave in and have a one-party government. It's been tried. How well does it work? I've been to other countries, and I won't name names here, where they do have one-party rule, and it's always a train wreck every time. We need checks and balances because human beings are fallen in a fallen world. My job now is as a pastor, and I preach about this. And maybe not everybody agrees with the particular message that I preach, which is the Christian gospel. I preach about Jesus Christ being our Lord and Savior. I preach about the cross as being the way to salvation. The blood of Jesus covers our sin. But even if you don't accept that gospel, even if you don't believe it, any fair reading of the human condition recognizes we are not good enough to trust one party or one person. It's been done in history, and again, it's a train wreck. And so I like the name. I like the three-headed eagle idea, the three branches of government, to check and balance each other. What happens in a country when that no longer applies, or when all three are aligned in one direction, and you throw in, say, for instance, the Fourth Estate, a press that's no longer fair and is oriented one way. We need to retain, we need to preserve, we need to fight for our freedoms. Fundamentally, I'm not a political person. I'm a person that I hope is based in principle and fundamentally in my faith, and I try to be faithful as a Lutheran pastor. That's who I am. I believe the Bible. I believe that's the Word of God. I believe the message of Jesus Christ, as I've already said. I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that He is the one way to heaven. But what we should all be agreed on is God's divine law. And we see this, for instance, expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We see this expressed in practical form in the Constitution of the United States, which is the law of the land. And here's a question. What happens in our system of government, when the preamble of the Constitution, which talks about we the people as its introduction, when we have a problem with those we elect or those we delegate power and authority to, what happens when they don't do their job or don't do it right or become corrupt or compromised? When they're bribed, when they don't discharge the duties of office according to their oath of office, do we just sit down and shut up, or do we act? What do? What does a Christian do? Even a pastor. Gee, I wonder, does a pastor have a responsibility in our system of government? We don't have a king or an emperor. It's we the people. So what do? This is a time for examination. How many of us thought we would be at the place we are at today, even 5 years ago or 10 years ago? I'm going to ask a question right here. I'm old enough, now I'm 71, I'm old enough to remember. Do you remember there used to be only the 3 networks on TV? And you had to get up and manually turn the black and white TV channel changer. Remember that? That's why God made kids, right? Go change the channel, okay? Do you remember the public service announcements on Friday and Saturday night on the networks? What did it say? Make sure you worship at the church or synagogue of your choice. Do you remember that? Yeah. Can you imagine them doing that today? I don't think so. I had my TV shows I liked to watch when I was a kid, and leaving Bugs Bunny aside, and the Chuck Jones Bugs Bunny cartoons, but Saturday morning TV, Roy Rogers, Sky King, and then, all those kinds of things. And the midweek programming, Leave It to Beaver, the Donna Reed Show, and I love this title. How well would this work today? Father Knows Best. Every half-hour program was a lesson in morality, an object lesson in, okay, Beav, you messed up. What did you learn? Remember that? There was a moral punchline in every show. The culture, the society reinforced who we were. It wasn't just the church. And even the church today is struggling to speak with a strong, consistent voice in the culture. It's an issue. Okay, there's a sermon. I want to introduce somebody very special to me, my wife, Elaine. Elaine, could you stand up, please? Tonight, what I want to do is I want to introduce myself to you so you get to know me, because this relates a lot to what's going on in this indictment and the case and everything else. I think you have to know who I am a little bit, but I need you to know my wife a little bit too. This poor woman's been shackled to me for 46 years. We've known each other for over 50, over half a century. We met when we were teenagers. And the thing that drew us together, we met at church, and it was the spiritual attraction and being friends, brother and sister in Christ, that drew us together. We are polar opposites in so many ways, but we are on the same wavelength spiritually, where I can look at her across the room, she can look at me, and we know what we're thinking. And that's very special. It's a love that's only grown stronger over the years. And we've been through our deep waters ourselves, as any married couple married that long has been through these things. But we're stronger today than we were when we started. There's no doubt about that. And I want to publicly say I love my wife, and I'm very blessed to have her. And sweetie, I love you. We have 4 children, and they are all responsible adults. I won't get into detail about who they are, but you would be impressed by any one of them. And we have 7 grandchildren as well. So hopefully that makes a statement there about who we are. And we're not perfect by any means, but we do know the Lord, and the Lord has helped us through a lot of things. So I wanted to mention her. I also want to mention somebody who's I consider a friend and come to know, and that's Dave Shestokas. Dave, could you stand up? Dave is one of my two attorneys, and the other one is down in the Atlanta area. But Dave, he has been a very dear person to me, and has been there at a couple of very critical times, and has been very dedicated in his service and self-sacrificing in his service to help me out, including a remarkable miracle of God, how I was able to get bail at the last minute because of Dave and his efforts going on Diamond and Silk program, where Silk, the night before I would have been taken into custody, pledged the balance of what we needed to get out on bail. Otherwise, I would have had to, yes, and thanks. Don't know if you know about Fulton County Jail down in Atlanta, but they are under federal supervision. In 2022, I believe it was, this was a press report that I've read. It seems hard for me to believe this could happen, but an inmate died being killed by bed bugs. And they've had people die there, according to reports. And that's where I would have had to spend time. God did a miracle. Dave was part of that miracle. Dave, thank you so much. Dave has run for public office before, and I pray and I hope that he runs for public office again. We need more people like Dave Shestokas in public office. So, yes. Okay. I'm under indictment, felony indictment. This is unbelievable to me. But when I think about the state of the culture in the country, maybe not so much. I'm under indictment for simply exercising my First Amendment rights and my pastoral duty. And I have a very unique background. I get the question, well, what was going on? How come you got caught up in this stuff? And some of these things I can't talk about. We'll have some Q&A after my presentation here. And I want to make sure that Dave has the opportunity to also field any questions you might have of a legal nature. I have to be obviously careful about talking about the case. But this is a shocking event. I never thought I would be under indictment. If you don't know, before I was a pastor, I was in law enforcement. That was my first career. In fact, my Lutheran joke is my first career was in the law and my second career is in the gospel. That's my Lutheran joke. And in law enforcement, I served mostly at the local level, and of that, mostly in Mendocino County out in California. I was a sheriff's sergeant out there. And I've done pretty much everything there is to do at the local law enforcement level. Working patrol, working corrections. I was a juvenile officer, and I've been on a SWAT team, help form and direct that, lead that. I wrote the standard operating procedure for the tactical team. And also was a major crimes investigator, up to and including homicides. And then I went to work, was hired by what was then called NIS. Today it's called NCIS. You may have seen a TV show. I was a federal special agent for NCIS. I worked out of then Moffett Field in the San Francisco Bay Area when that was an active naval base. And I was assigned to foreign counterintelligence, counterterrorism. That was the work that I did there in what today is now Silicon Valley, which is where I grew up. And then felt the Lord's call to go into the ministry because I wanted to get into the most basic of human needs, and that's a spiritual need. And we know of this need, each one of us, even if we don't know the answer to that need. The human condition, the human heart is hungry for love, for purpose, for a place, for a hope, not despair. And that is what the Christian gospel gives us to our deepest needs. This is my conviction. Now here I'm talking about getting to know me a little bit. As part of the indictment against me, I'm accused of trying to solicit people to lie illegally, to do something that's wrong. This is the furthest thing from the truth. My role, my job, my responsibility, my duty, my calling is summarized maybe best by Paul's words in Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love. Amen. Right? We speak the truth in love. We always shed light, not hide in the darkness. We are transparent. We do things openly and honestly and legally. We support the rule of law. By definition, I could never have had the career in law enforcement if I was a law violator. I would not have been qualified to be a local officer or federal special agent. As a pastor, I have divine vows to speak the truth in a consistent way with the Word of God, the Bible, and to present the gospel of Jesus Christ. I am not out to promote lies, subvert the truth, be illegal in any way at all. And I have my flaws and my faults, but that isn't one of them. And to be in this situation is totally shocking. Now, I will say this, and I've said it many times, God is on his throne. Do you believe that? I believe that. And we trust him in every circumstance. And if the worst were to happen, God would be with me in a prison cell, because what I'm facing is, if convicted under this RICO statute and the other things that go along with it, the RICO statute alone requires a minimum of 5 years in a Georgia state penitentiary, up to 20 years. No parole, no probation, no nothing, no home supervision, none of that. 5 years hard time, up to 20 years. I'm 71 years old. If the other charges add on to that, which in theory they could, it could be up to 90 plus years. Okay, that's a death sentence, okay? If that were to happen, I would consider it all joy, as the Word of God says. Not emotionally, but in terms of the faith. How many people have done prison time over the centuries for the right reason and the cause of Christ, or the cause of the rule of law? How many people have suffered? How many people have paid the ultimate price defending liberty on a battlefield? My dad served in the South Pacific in the Navy in World War II. And being part of the greatest generation, he talked about, because I was always trying to get more information from him. He'd say, well, I was a machinist mate, and I was behind the lines. I didn't fight. I just wanted to repair ships and do my machinist work. Well, I said, well, Dad, did they ever bomb you or anything like that behind the lines? Oh, yeah, a couple of times, but it never got any closer than 50 yards or so. Dad, you know what they call that? They call that danger close, but very self-effacing. He was willing to serve. How many thousands, how many millions have paid the price ultimately? We have got to learn how to have a backbone in the battle we face today. Right? I was talking to somebody earlier about action steps. I believe as a Christian pastor that each one of us is created by God to have a place and a purpose. and that we have that place and purpose uniquely in all the world. We're like snowflakes because we're flaky, right? No. But we're all unique and individual. And what is your place and your purpose? If, for instance, you're in the media, do you have an obligation to tell the truth, to report fairly and honestly? To understand that if you don't have a byline there, I took journalism in high school and college a little bit. If you're reporting a straight news story, is there an obligation as part of the Fourth Estate to tell the truth and tell it fairly and not just run some kind of hidden agenda? There's a lot of different places for lots of different people. What's your place? What's your purpose? What's your action step that you need to take? Okay, that's my second sermon. I got to quit. Anyway, I had some coffee, so I'm feeling better now. This is shocking what's happened here. It's shocking to my wife and my family. I will tell you this, and you can ask Elaine yourself. She supports me 100%. My little church I serve, and I'm officially retired. I'm serving a vacancy position in a church in the western suburbs, southwest suburbs. And my church is 100% behind me, their pastor. But I worry about them. If I go to prison, I don't know if they can find another pastor because they're so small. I don't take a full paycheck or anything like that because I'm officially retired and I'm trying to help them out. I've been there for about 4 years now. And I'm concerned about what would happen to that. That is persecution, folks, for simply living according to the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. Freedom of religion, one of the 5 freedoms listed in the Bill of Rights. That's what I'm guilty of doing, is exercising my freedom according to my duty. Okay, I want to give you some war stories. We call them war stories in law enforcement. The different things we've been involved with. And let me just ask, Debbie, how much time do we have left on this board? About how much? 15 minutes. 15 minutes, okay, good. I'll try and be respectful of the clock here a little bit, and then we'll do some Q&A. And again, there's a method to the madness here because I want you to get to know me a little bit as well as Elaine. Because a lot of this comes down to whether or not what is being said about me is a lie or not. And so you have to know my character. And maybe a couple of stories we can talk about this. From my law enforcement days, Elaine knows this story. I started out in Menlo Park, California, in that police department. At a time, 1973. Can you believe that? That's a long time ago. And the first homicide I ever saw, a young black man had gotten shot through the neck, through both carotid arteries with a .45 pistol. And I was driving up as late at night, about 2 a.m. There had been a party, and this young man was caught in the wrong place at the right time. And he caught this round through the neck. And there was an officer with him. The young man was bleeding out on the street in front of this house. And the officer was trying to give him CPR. You can't do that with somebody shot through the neck. And I won't describe what I saw. And I learned that you smell blood. You don't just see it. You smell it. And I watched the first person that I ever saw die. And at the end of the shift, and I had to witness the autopsy on that too, so I had a couple of firsts there, and that was a horrifying experience for me that first time around, witnessing an autopsy. And when my shift was finally done, about 24 hours later, I went on over to visit Elaine, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I just cried like a baby in her arms. Do you remember that, Elaine? And that was the start of a long career of law enforcement and also chaplaincy work. There's a lot of tragedy out there, and we need to understand and support the people who try and keep the devil at bay. And law enforcement does a very tough job. And they're caught in impossible situations sometimes, and we need to support them. And I learned that early on, how impossible it can be. I have a lot of other law enforcement stories. Like I say, I've done virtually every, the only thing I never did was work undercover narcs, but I helped them on raids and backup and things like that. So I've had a lot of those experiences as well. But again, I felt the Lord's call to go into the ministry. And when I made that decision, my buddies in law enforcement said, you know, this is great, Steve, because you were always ministering to us, even as a layman. You'd have Bible studies with us, and you'd help us spiritually and pray with us, and we'd go on Christian retreats. And they said, now you can go be a pastor and a chaplain and come back and minister to this community that we have. And that's a big part of what I did and who I am to this day. And so even at seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I served as a Fort Wayne police chaplain there for the 4 years I was there. And one of the situations that happened is one evening, I was at Marty's birthday party. Remember that, Elaine? And it was my birthday too, and we were celebrating. And probably about 9 o'clock that evening, I got a call from the Fort Wayne Police dispatch. They'd had a fatal accident. And I was dispatched as a chaplain to the hospital. And I went there and I discovered that the person who had been killed was one of my classmates at seminary, Ray Chahusky. And he was leaving the seminary campus in the evening with Leah, his fiancée, beautiful young couple. And there was a drunk driver coming in front of the seminary at high speed in a pickup truck with his headlights off, and T-boned Ray right in the driver's door and killed him and caused severe head trauma to Leah. And I was there just in time at the hospital to, just before her dad and brother came on in, and I had to tell them what happened. And her dad just collapsed to the floor. There are things called death notifications that chaplains do. I was at Columbine High School. We lived about 45 minutes away in northern Colorado Springs. I was pastoring a church called Family of Christ. You can look it up. I started that church and was pastoring there. Columbine happened in 1999, April. And I was serving as a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms chaplain at the time, and also Colorado Springs police chaplain. Elaine and I had been at lunch. I happened to turn on the car radio after lunch. I was taking Elaine back to work at Focus on the Family, where she worked. You may have heard of Focus on the Family. I also helped with, I'll mention this, I helped with the hostage situation they had back in the 90s, actually on the National Day of Prayer, and was part of that effort because I was a Colorado Springs police chaplain at the time. And so we've had the opportunity before to talk to Dr. Dobson, and then I did some ministry with that. But Columbine happened. I heard it on the radio. Didn't know that it was where this mass shooting had taken place. We had two of our own kids in high school at the time. I was concerned, obviously, that it happened in Colorado Springs. I called Colorado Springs Police Dispatch to talk to the watch commander. He said, no, it's not here. It's up at Columbine High School in Littleton. And so I dropped Elaine off and I headed up there. And on the way, I called ATF Peer Support out in D.C., and they said, you're our closest chaplain. You're going to be our lead chaplain up there. Obviously, ATF would be involved with other agencies investigating this. So I went on up there, and they were, the tactical teams were still evacuating students and teachers. And I went in on the Pierce Street side, and there's some things I'm not going to describe, or people that I've ministered to, but the tactical teams are bringing these groups of students and teachers out in groups from the various classrooms when they got them. And I would take them and escort these groups from the inner perimeter that they had set up there on Pierce Street and walk them back and calm them down in the process back to Leawood Elementary School, where they'd be reunited with their parents and families there. And that shuttle, we did that for several hours. And at the end of the day, and going into the evening, after all of these people had been reunited with their families, who was left at Leawood Elementary School? Which family members were still there waiting? The family members of the dead kids. At one point, I knelt by the side, or where one young man had been shot and killed on one of the campus sidewalks there. And it was a complete zoo in that whole area. A lot of fire trucks, law enforcement, ambulances, and even helicopters up in the air from the news media. And I was looking up in the sky at the helicopters, and I see the cameras poking out, looking down at that campus. And this young man had been shot and killed out there, and I was thinking, how would I feel if I was that young man's parent, lying there dead all by himself, out there in front of God and everybody, being filmed by news camera. And so I knelt by this young man and prayed, because I wanted to be able to pass on to that family that somebody was there for that reason, and maybe bring a measure of comfort. When the forensic teams and the Bureau guys, the FBI guys, they were working the cafeteria, and there's actually an unexploded bomb that these boys had set up there that didn't go off. And I won't say why it didn't go off, but it was a God thing. If it would have gone off, it would have taken out a bunch of agents, and maybe yours truly, I don't know. But in the library, that was state of Colorado forensic teams that were working that. And when they were done with their work, I went on in with two other ATF chaplains, John South and Murray Fricke. And we went into the library where most of those kids were killed. And I asked and was invited to have a prayer in the library, which I did, for the families, for the school, for the community, indeed for everybody in this terrible circumstance. And the two boys who perpetrated that act were together in the corner of the library where they'd killed themselves. And I remember they had black T-shirts, and in red letters across, they had put these words in red letters, wrath, W-R-A-T-H, wrath. So they were sending a signal that they were wrath incarnated here. And it was just pure evil that I was looking at. And then John and Murray and I, we helped with bagging the victims there, including, you may have heard about this one young lady, Cassie Bernal. I bagged Cassie Bernal. And there's a book written, She Said Yes, because one of the things these boys did was they asked probably at least 3 of those kids, do you believe in God? And when the kids said yes, then they shot and killed them. Cassie was one of them. Okay. And that was a terrible thing. Now, you've heard of 9/11? When September 11th, 2001 happened, 9/11 happened, Elaine and I were living out in San Jose, California. We were on the other coast. And early in the morning, my son called me from Florida, where he was in flight training with the Air Force. He's served as an Air Force officer. And he called me up and he said, Dad, turn on the news. And I flipped on the news just in time to see an airliner. And to this day, I don't know if it was recording or if it was live, of going into one of the Twin Towers, the second tower. And I knew immediately it was a terrorist act because airliners don't fly into buildings on a clear day. And I even knew who it was because of my interest in that kind of thing. I knew it was Osama bin Laden, and my first reaction was Osama bin Laden is a dead man. And it took 10 years, but the Navy SEALs got him. And I knew I would be involved in this because part of what I do is called responding to major critical incidents of national significance. That's technical language. That's DHS protocol for understanding what these big incidents are about. And but the airlines were shut down. Remember the first 3 days civil aviation was shut down. And so I first went up to San Francisco International Airport, where I worked with the United Airlines Flight 93 crisis team. That was the destination airport from Newark, where Flight 93 was flying from. It's the one that went down in Shanksville, where the passengers took over the plane and prevented that plane from crashing into maybe the White House or Capitol building, and saved that in a heroic act. And then on Friday that week, United put me on one of their first flights out to Newark. And so I went on out there and stayed at Ground Zero for about a month. And then I went back several times afterwards. And there's too many stories to tell, but have you heard of the Ground Zero Cross? By the way, I've learned to document everything. And so I've got pictures and documentation on all of these things, in case you're wondering. In Building 6, next to the North Tower, that was an 8-story building with an underground parking garage. When the North Tower came down, it collapsed Building 6 next to it. And in the rubble, in the next few days, the workers found a perfectly proportioned steel beam cross with what looked like a Good Friday shroud over one arm. And to give you the inside baseball story of that, it was actually part of the bearing wall of Building 6, and it broke at the joints to form that cross. And it was in this middle of what I call an amphitheater from hell. And the sheet metal that formed what looked like a Good Friday shroud had come from the North Tower and wrapped around one arm of the cross. And that cross became a shrine for the workers. They called Building 6 God's house. And when I saw it, I was with Pastor Frusty, and I went to Claude Wytak, who was the daytime supervisor for AMEC Corporation in north half of Ground Zero. And I said, Claude, we got to preserve that cross because it's a shrine. And he said, you're right, let me see what I can do. And so he talked to his bosses, and in the meantime, myself and a couple other chaplains, we met with Ken Holden, who was Mayor Giuliani's Director of Design and Construction for the City of New York. This was in early, I think it was October 2nd in the evening. Told Ken about it, and he said, well, I've got a meeting with Mayor Giuliani in the morning, tomorrow morning at 9, and I'll ask him. And he said, I'm Jewish. He says, but hey, it is what it is. It's a shrine. And so he talked to Mayor Giuliani the next morning. I got a call at 9:05. He said, Giuliani says, pull it out and save it, which is what we did. Now here, I'll give a little invitation. If anybody's interested in having me come speak sometime to your group, whatever that may be, a church or civic group, I'd be happy to do that. And if you like, I've got PowerPoint pictures of a lot of the stuff I'm sharing with you here, especially 9/11. And be happy to share that. So I went to Hurricane Katrina. I'll wrap it up here real quickly. So, yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Went to Hurricane Katrina and assisted there. I got a call from Matt Harrison 6 days after Katrina hit. Katrina hit on a Sunday night, Monday morning. And there were a group of people that were sheltering at St. Paul Lutheran Church and School in downtown New Orleans. And Pastor Dave Goodine had the foresight to stock supplies and generator, water, food, because he decided to stay there. That was a heroic decision. He knew there were people in the neighborhood who couldn't or wouldn't evacuate, and he wanted a place for them to come to. So he sheltered about 100 people from the neighborhood there around St. Paul's, in the basement of St. Paul's. But they were trapped, not by the waters, but by the roving gangs. If you remember, there's a big problem with criminals running loose. And during this process of the 6 days before we got them out, there was an older black lady, about 80 years old, and she showed up at the door there for help. And she was carrying her son's ashes in an urn under her arm. She had been gang raped. And Dave pulled her in. I got a call on Saturday following, 6 days into this, from Matt Harrison, who is our director of LCMS World Relief Human Care. He called at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, Steve, he says, we got a problem. And I was doing welfare checks along the Mississippi River there. He says, we got these people and they can't get out. They're trapped by the gangs. And they're starting to have problems, and this lady got raped and she's going to die. So I started to head into the city because I knew when I went across the Mississippi on one of the bridges that there'd be a checkpoint set up by the National Guard, Louisiana National Guard. And Sergeant Rick Moore was there with a Humvee, and I talked to Sergeant Moore. I said, look, we've got this problem. He said, write it down for me. So on the hood of his Humvee, I wrote this down about the situation. And he mobilized his guys, and we had them out, the people, we had them out in 4 hours on buses, and with a police escort and National Guard escort. And they went in with red lights and siren. I talked to Dave Goodine later, Pastor Goodine later, and he says, yeah, he says, I was talking to my son who is back on leave from Iraq. And we were kind of joking about he needed to go back to Iraq where it was safe. And we were trying to figure out what to do. And it was in the evening, on that Saturday evening, and all of a sudden we saw these lights flashing and all these big engines rumbling and everything like that. And they came on in and pulled us out of there. A lot of other stories. 2017, I'll finish with this one. War stories. 2017 was actually my busiest deployment year. And I went to 3 different hurricanes and California wildfires and then the hotel shooting in Las Vegas. Remember Mandalay Bay? Where I worked with the FBI. By the way, there was a motorized wheelchair out there in that plaza, and I wondered what happened to the person who had been in that motorized wheelchair. I lied. The investigators there, and people were running for their lives. The investigators, they were talking about all the cell phones that people had dropped and how the cell phones kept ringing and ringing and ringing until the batteries went dead. Why? Because families were checking on the people who had been killed or injured. And the investigators were having to listen to these cell phones ring and ring and ring. I followed a set of bloody footprints across the Catholic church across the street. Wondered about the story there. There was a lot of work to be done there. The Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey had 3 or 4 times the amount of water as Hurricane Katrina. It turned Texas into a lake, southern Texas along the Gulf there. And I was bringing water to a rest home, had 163 residents who were stuck there. And I was bringing them bottled water because they were having to boil water. You may remember in Florida they had residents die in a rest home. I think there were like 6 that died. And we were trying to keep that from happening. So I was transporting this water, and I had a rental vehicle, which I got fully insured in in Tennessee on the way. I thought, you know what, I better get this thing fully insured. It's a good thing. I got the water delivered to the rest home. They were very, very grateful for that. On the way out, my GPS lied to me, took me out a different way. And it was like the Johnny Cash song, 4 Feet High and Rising. And I almost made it, almost. But just before I got to the rise that came up out of the water, I felt the back end of my SUV start to float. And I was smart enough to have my driver's window down, and I'm climbing out my driver's window, and I'm thinking as I'm climbing out in this flood and losing my vehicle, I said, you know what, I'm about ready to go on Medicare here. Is this really a smart way to live now? And I actually thought that. And there's other stuff about how I saved my daughter's stuff and all this sort of thing. My wife, I had to finally confess to her, how long ago, a month or 2 ago, about that incident, because I knew I'd have to start talking about these things. I'd never told her. My daughter knew because I helped rescue her stuff, and there's a story behind that, but anyhow, I won't get into that. But I finally had to confess the truth to my wife that, yes, and against her advice, she had been texting me saying, don't be stupid, Steve, and you should listen to your wife, guys. And so I had to confess this, and I'm confessing it now once again, because I had to pull out from the records the accident report for the rental company. I've ruined Enterprise vehicles so many times. Anyway, I drowned that one. I have taught chaplaincy at our seminary. I've done these different things. I've written a book for officers. We put out a special Bible edition for law enforcement, about 40,000 copies over the years in 5 main editions. What I invite you to do is pray, but also look at the record. And then look at the allegations against me. Talk to one of my elders at church. Talk to my wife. Talk to these people. Look at the documented record of the life that I've lived. And by the way, this isn't about me, but I think the Lord may be using me in this situation. I think that's a possibility. Because if it can happen to me, what can happen to you? What can happen to our First Amendment rights? We have got to have a backbone in this stuff. This is bigger than me. I am not doing a deal. I'm not copying any pleas. I'm not going to agree to a lie and let the chips fall where they may. And I ask for your prayers, and I thank you for your support. And so let's do the next part of this.
I have no idea what the indictment is. I came to hear that. I'm a physician. I've taken care of people shot through the neck, dead in car accidents. What's the indictment?
Okay,
No idea.
I'm going to have Dave, my attorney, and we're ready to go. That's a good question. Okay? And I expected that. Go ahead.
Sure, Steve can tell you about him. My job is to answer questions like you have, okay? He's indicted under Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act in Georgia, which is generally speaking designed to address matters of, say, the mafia and street gangs and drug cartels and things of that nature. But they have put together this scenario where 19 people, many of whom don't know each other, have theoretically joined together to illegally overturn the 2020 presidential election. That's the RICO charge. That's the overlapping charge. There's 41 individual counts within the indictment. Counts 20 and 21 involve Pastor Steve. Counts 20 and 21 involve where allegedly he knocked on the door of a neighbor of an election worker by the name of Ruby Freeman, essentially to get some directions. And then 21 says that he knocked on the door of Ruby Freeman, supposedly to get her to falsely testify that she was involved in some illegal activities regarding the 2020 election. Counts 30 and 31 are also involving Ruby Freeman, where supposedly he's involved in some sort of conspiracy. And there's a series of phone calls and text messages that they allege. The goal of those things were, in fact, to again get Ms. Freeman to change her story about what she was doing. For those of you that may not know the name Ruby Freeman, you're probably familiar with the infamous video of the State Farm Arena, where there's an election worker that pulls a bunch of ballots out and then starts running them through a machine after they kicked out all the election workers. This is the woman that's involved in that. And for that, the RICO charge carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years up to 20, $25,000 fine. The other charges, when you add them all together, as Pastor Steve adds up to potential 90 years in prison. And those are the allegations: knocking on 2 doors, being on a couple of phone calls and text messages. And supposedly because of that. And by the way, Pastor Steve never met President Trump. He doesn't know President Trump. As the best of my knowledge, he's never been in the same room with Mr. Trump, Mr. Giuliani, Ms. Ellis, Ms. Powell, any of the other names that you're familiar with in this incident. But somehow or other, they've stitched together these 5 or 6 different individual alleged conspiracies to come up with this RICO charge that's designed to do completely other things. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah,
Okay.
but in the beginning, I didn't know if you're talking about you lived in Georgia or Illinois. You know,
No.
I was kind of lost, and I came here to hear that.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. No, he doesn't live in. He didn't live in Georgia at the time. He lives in Illinois. As any number of people, I get questions regularly about what was he allegedly doing in Georgia. I would suggest to you that Pastor Lee's history of being in places where there's been chaotic situations and crises in America, he's responded to offer both his unique combination of law enforcement and pastoral services. And America was in crisis in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And that's the answer to that. I can't go into too much other details because you know what? At this juncture, that I told you what the allegations are, and that's the burden of the state to prove what his intent is. Okay, that's the burden of the state. But the state is saying that he was part and parcel of this conspiracy to illegally overturn the 2020 election.
So I have a question on when you're doing the discovery, do you have limits on what you can get, what access to what information you can get during discovery? And since it is their burden of proof, how are they going to provide and render sufficient competent evidential matter to be able to convict him?
The first instance we have, they've given, last week that we just got what they call 2 terabytes of information. We had to provide them with an external hard drive for the purpose of downloading the 2 terabytes of information that they've gotten. They sent me a copy on the hard drive. We have counsel in Georgia who has our original hard drive. And so we're going through that, although we have information that some of the other counsels have gotten as much as 8 terabytes of information. So it seems as though that they've not given the same stuff to all the other counsels. And I would like to think, you know, they seem to think that we're not talking to each other on a couple of things. Something strange happened just yesterday that I'll share with you. That I had late at night, I got a phone call from a reporter from NBC News in Atlanta, and she said, "You're familiar with the videotapes of Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell that are now circulating around relative to their proffers and discussions that they had with the state before they pled guilty?" I said, "Yeah, I'm familiar with those." She says, "Do you guys have copies of those?" I said, "Yes, we do." And then the reporter says, she says, "Can you give them to me?" And I said, "No, of course I cannot give them to you." But today, those things are all available on the internet, 2 or 3 hours of Ms. Ellis and Ms. Powell talking. And also today, the state filed a motion in court to have what they call a protective order that limits what they can theoretically give us. They are saying that some defense attorney made this stuff public, and as best as we know, neither ourselves nor any of the other defense counsel that we speak with had anything to do with these things becoming public. It almost seems like the state made them public and then went to court to protect them from being public. And today I was part and parcel of putting together a motion opposing the protective order that the state's doing. There's going to be a hearing on that in Georgia. The various defense counsel got together. There's 4 or 5 among us that we've kind of designated to argue this matter in court. We filed our own position in opposition to that, and then there's a couple other counsel that we're ascribing to the arguments, adopting the arguments that they're going to make in court. So it's a mess, and it's going to go on for a long time. We don't know what's in that whole entire 2 terabytes. We have just recently gotten sorted some video out of it. There's something called Brady material. Brady material is what the state has that they have to give you when there's information they have that exculpates or tends to prove the innocence of the defendant. But they bury 2 or 3 little sentences in 2 terabytes of data. So we wind up having to look through all the stuff to find out what it is that they have that's Brady material. So the discovery process is ongoing. We have motions due on December 1st. We also have motions in place at the moment to sever Pastor Lee's case, his trial, from 15 of the other defendants. There's 2 other people within the conspiracy that he's accused of that that are involved in this Ruby Freeman allegation, and so we have a motion to sever that trial from the rest of them. The state has not even responded to us yet, and so we don't even know when there's going to be a hearing on that motion. But then we have our own motions relative to discovery that are due on the 1st of December, and by then, hopefully, we'll have plowed through the 2 terabytes that they gave us and try and find out from the other folks what the other 6 terabytes are involved in. So it's a long, involved process. It's nice to hear, and we're happy that Pastor Lee is pleading not guilty, that he won't plead to a lie. I've heard some of the pleas that the other people have pled to, and I can tell you that when I've heard what it is that they said that was illegal, there's no crime in what they described. There's no crime in what they described. They gave him slaps on the wrist, and by the way, nobody that's had entered a plea has pled guilty to the overlying RICO charge. It just seems like the effort is to get all these guilty pleas in place so that they can say that President Trump is surrounded by criminals, right? But the fact is the way those pleas run, they run on what they call the Georgia First Offender Law, and as long as these people, Ms. Ellis and Ms. Palm, Mr. Cheesebro, as long as they stay out of trouble for the course of their probation period, their records get cleaned. It's like they didn't do anything, right? That's the essence of these pleas that they've gotten. So for the time being, they can call them criminals, and when that's over with, they're not criminals. But these pleas are marketing matters. But the process is the penalty. It's very, very onerous to plead not guilty. It's very onerous to plead not guilty. Let's just assume momentarily we plow through this discovery matter, and that could take any number of 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Once we get to a situation where we're picking a jury, assuming the severance doesn't work and the state is trying to try everybody all together, we have 15 defendants, all of whom get 7, 8 challenges against jurors. So while we're doing jury selection, we're in a situation with 120, 150 objections to jurors, not just for cause, but just because we don't like the way they look or the way they walk. But then you have objections for cause. The jury process could be 3, 4 months long. Just picking the jury, the state indicates that they'll have about 150 witnesses. There's every reason to believe that the defense among them 50, 60, 70 witnesses. So you're looking at 250 witnesses back and forth. It may be 9, 10 months in Georgia, not counting legal fees, not counting staff, not counting anything else. Living in Georgia, coming back and forth from Chicago, et cetera, we've kind of calculated for 9 or 10 months is about $120,000, $140,000 just to plead not guilty. Just to plead not guilty. And when Steve mentioned that it's all your fights would regarding what it is to everybody, there's what they call 161 overt acts that were in furtherance of the conspiracy. I would suggest to you that the number one overt act is President Trump giving a speech on November 4th, 2020, the day after the election, and they say that on the day after the election, he falsely claimed that he had won. And that was contributing to the conspiracy. Number 8 on the hit list of overt acts was Mr. Giuliani and Ms. Ellis in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, putting on witnesses before the Pennsylvania State Senate, describing things that went wrong in Pennsylvania during the course of the 2020 election. And also then they're saying that there was lawyers giving legal advice that day in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Guess who was among the witnesses that Ms. Ellis and Mr. Giuliani put on that day? Me. People are going, Dave, how did you not get indicted? You know, because I was part and parcel of that. 80 and 81, I have Pastor Steve knocking on a couple of doors. 87 and 88, have him being on a couple of phone calls. Of the 161 overt acts, 159 of them implicate all of the First Amendment rights that we have, whether it's speech or press or religion or assembly or the petition to government for redress of grievances. This fight is everybody's fight. If there is any success for this case any place, our First Amendment rights, all of our First Amendment rights will have been diminished or in some respects disappeared. I will tell you also that I've done interviews with folks from Paris and London and Hamburg, Germany, and New Zealand and Australia. The reporters from around the world, they get it. They know what a danger this is to the rights of Americans, and they know that the protection of American rights is what they point to when they try to protect their own rights. This case is well beyond what and we're going to do our best to keep him away from the bed bugs. You know, we're going to do our very best to keep him away from the bed bugs. But the fact is it's well beyond Steve.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you got a pastor and a lawyer. We could be here a long time.
Hey, good evening, Pastor. You know, like all of us here, we're definitely praying for you.
Thank you.
And yeah, give him a round of applause. So one of those indicted, as you mentioned, Jenna Ellis. She was here at an event last year, and I met her, and a really cool lady. Now, what did you think of that very animated mugshot photo of hers?
I didn't see Jenna's mugshot, but I will tell you, look up Pastor Steve's. One of the great mugshots of all time is Pastor Steve Lee. And he should have made T-shirts about his mugshot as well. I didn't see, but fortunately, Pastor Steve did, in fact, have his collar on when they took his mugshot. I was surprised. They did not cut the collar out of the mugshot, so his mugshot shows him with the collar on. I don't know about Jenna's mugshot. I never saw it. President Trump's mugshot, obviously, is very, very famous. I wish we could have monetized Pastor Steve's mugshot in the same way.
Other questions?
Hi. What is the status of Ruby Freeman? Is she testifying against you?
There's a additional of the conspiracy that allegedly involves Pastor Steve. There are two other individuals. One is a fellow by the name of Harrison Floyd. Another is an individual by the name of Trevian Cootie. And Mr. Floyd is going all out. His and his team are going all out to, in fact, prove that Ruby Freeman was involved in election fraud during the course of this situation. They've released several audio tapes of hers. They've got subpoenas out to various electoral organizations regarding her situation, and I can say this because the subpoenas are public. We're in contact and kind of coordinating some things with the other defense folks. So but what I am saying is public knowledge because actually Mr. Floyd has himself personally been tweeting about their belief that in fact Ruby Freeman was guilty of election offenses that night. They are going all out to prove that the election in Georgia was stolen in 2020. And so that's going to be part and parcel of their defense.
I may have missed this earlier. Again, what led the indictment to Pastor Lee? What was the event that actually brought him into that? I may have missed that, and I apologize. But
sure,
if you would
that's
reiterate.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that was certainly part of what I answered there. But you know what? We back up to November 22 real quick. In November 22, the Georgia Special Purpose Grand Jury tried to compel Pastor Steve to go to Georgia to testify during the course of the investigation. The authority of a The authority of a grand jury to compel testimony ends at the borders of the state unless they get somebody else to cooperate, and or unless they get a judicial order from the state where the individual whose testimony they want lives. So they sent a subpoena out to Kendall County. Steve lives in Kendall County. It wound up in the Kendall County Courthouse. He got a notice to appear. That's when I actually got involved in the case. Over 3 days, we had 3 days of testimony where we had the evidence from Georgia that they had involving Pastor Steve. At the end of those 3 days, the judge in Kendall County quashed the subpoena, denied the request to bring him to compel his appearance in Georgia, and ultimately said they don't even have enough evidence to consider him a material witness in this matter. And so the judge denied the request to compel him. And that was November of 22. The judge here in Kendall County said, I'll give you 30 days. You want to bring us any more to prove that he has something to do with this, I'll reconsider it. They never provided anything else in those 30 days. I'm now his counsel of public record. I never heard from them again. He never heard from them again. Kendall County never heard from them again. On August 14th, 2023, at 10:30 at night, they held a press conference and announced the indictment on 19 people, including Pastor Steve. How they wound up from him not even, the only judicial decision outside of Georgia regarding Pastor Steve said he's got nothing to do with this. And yet these people over there have said that he's a criminal and they want to give him a mandatory minimum of 5 years. So I wish I can tell you their theories. We're talking about their theories. Their theories say because he knocked on a couple of doors and was on 2 phone calls that he was overtly trying to overturn the election. Okay, that's their theory. But as far as we're concerned, he's exercising, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. And in certain circumstances, some of the folks involved in his alleged conspiracy talked to officials from the government. So I'm going with, petition the government for redress of grievances. Our whole First Amendment is under attack on a bunch of specious, I'll save my nasty language for elsewhere.
Dave?
Yes.
Over here. The guy that pops up everywhere.
Hey, Don, it's good to see you, man.
So, just tremendous character of Pastor Lee. Are you going to be able to work that in anywhere to show his character of a person? I know that's tough at a trial.
Absolutely. We've got, we're in the process now of, Steve, all the things that Steve's done over the course of his life from all around the country and around the world. There are so many folks that are willing to step forward, travel to Georgia, testify to his character, his position as law enforcement. And actually what they're doing, as far as we're concerned, they have to have their theory is that he intended to do these evil things. And so they cannot do that without introducing some sort of character evidence, in which case our character evidence rebuttal is going to be massive. And so when they talk, and so when I say we could probably do 9 months just on Steve's character, and we have every intention of doing so. We have every intention of doing so. Thank you, Don.
If we don't, did you have a question? Okay, just.
Sidney Powell produced a plethora of affidavits. Are you guys at liberty to say your opinion on that, or does that kind of go against you?
Sidney Powell, as I mentioned, there's 5 or 6 individual kind of conspiracies within this overarching RICO charge. The one conspiracy involving Sidney involves Coffee County. Coffee County and the inspection of certain election machines out in Coffee County, which is a separate county from Fulton where the case is being heard. And so anything that Ms. Powell has to say has literally no bearing on the case involving Pastor Lee. So, I know what she has to say on that is just, it's of no relevance to the what they charged Steve with.
If there aren't any other questions, we'd like to thank Pastor Lee for his presentation and Dave Shostokis for coming to help represent him tonight so that he can answer the questions that Pastor Lee could not. So thank you to Pastor Stephen Lee and Dave Shostokis.